All right. Joining us for this talk is someone who I've admittedly wanted to talk to for a while. Sarah Rumpf joins us for today. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thanks for having me on.
So what have you been up to these days? It's been a year, hasn't it? So what are you up to?
Well, I am the contributing editor at Mediaite. It's definitely the best website that I've worked for. The media political business is a circus and can be a nightmare at times and definitely pretty hectic. But we're one of the unusual places that really does have a diverse mix of views. And it's been a bit of a relief. I feel like a lot of people on the right and left are getting too much into their own information silos. And every time I get a chance to speak to anybody, and I'm going to take this advantage and do it now, if you are liberal, please, at least once a week, read websites like Reason and National Review, read my Twitter feed. If you are on the right, please, at least once a week, read The Atlantic, read Vox, read Slate, read Salon. You don't have to read them all. You don't have to read them every day, but find ones that are well written. Find somebody that is writing from a different political perspective and read it and just see what they're saying. You don't have to change your mind. You just have to realize that other people are saying other things, and that's okay. I feel like that would solve a lot of problems. So please, to your viewers, step out of your information bubble at least once or twice a week. It's good for you, I promise.
New York Times and Politico, if you're watching this, you know what to do. Yeah, I find it sad that in a sense that there's been a fragmenting of the American media landscape. You have like outlets like NR on the right, and New York Times and Politico are increasingly solidifying themselves on the left, although at times they've had right-wing or conservative columnists. But lately, whenever that's happened, there's a sense, I think, and I think this is true on both the right and left, that there are their outlets and the other outlets, and they just don't mix. And I guess just please go into more detail why we shouldn't think like that, because I agree with you, but explain that more.
You know, when you're talking about like the New York Times and the Washington Post have conservative columnists, the fact that we know them as the conservative columnists for the Washington Post or the conservative columnists for the New York Times is in and of itself the problem. If you're talking about real diversity, I am very glad to see the type of demographic diversity that's been increasing over the past, really the past decade. You know, you've got racial, religious, gender diversity. That is good, but you still have a situation where you have a very tightly marching in step sort of ideological diversity, and that creates its own problems. And it's not just political. If you look at who is getting hired by these big national newspapers, and this is happening at the same time as local television stations and local newspapers are losing their funding and are cutting staff or even shutting down entirely, while the New York Times and the Washington Post grow. And I don't have a problem with the Washington Post or the New York Times. Like, you're never going to see me calling them fake news or the enemy of the people or all that nonsense. But we do have a situation where the vast majority of the people they hire are from upper income families, have gone to Ivy League type schools. And that's a different sort of mindset, and that's a different life experience than a lot of people in America. And you see that same situation happening with Congress, where I don't know how many friends you have in DC, but the rent is really expensive up there. So the kind of person who can afford to go to DC and get one of those entry-level Capitol Hill jobs, those scheduler jobs and the people that are running around and making copies and doing all that kind of stuff, they pay dirt. So if you're going to afford an apartment in DC, but a job that pays dirt, or even worse, one of those unpaid internships, you have to have family money. So, and it's really hard to get a Capitol Hill job if you don't already have a Capitol Hill job.
Right.
And so the entry to these situations and to these job paths ends up being narrowed to a more elite economically, the upper income coming from certain colleges kind of thing. And so when a member of Congress is reading a bill, trying to decide on a policy, they're being advised by people who may have very good intentions and may be very good people and may be very intelligent. But I'd like to take a survey of members of Congress and their staff. When was the last time you had to hold off on a major purchase until another paycheck came through? When was the last time you had to wait to go to the grocery store?
Right.
And I think a lot of Americans understand the pain behind those questions, and a lot of members of Congress and a lot of their staff and a lot of journalists don't.
Yeah, I agree with you on every one of those points. I wish we had a media landscape that and a political landscape that better reflected the country, both economically and ethnically, racially, and ideologically. I just it's a shame that is not the case, and I think that government would be better run if that were indeed the case, and that's true with, by the way, with both Democrats and Republicans. I guess I guess what I just was curious about is how you got into the whole political and political business as well as writing. Like, what got you into that?
It's a bit of a wandering story, and I'm not sure that most people would be able to follow my path, so I'm always a little hesitant to give people career advice. I started out as a lawyer, and what I like to joke is that I was a lawyer and then I escaped. But I'm proud of my law degree. I still, it's still something that's useful. It's an education and a mental, intellectual way of analyzing problems and dealing with arguments that is an absolutely vital skill set as a journalist, and especially as a commentator. But I did go to law school. I practiced for a couple of years. And when I was still in Orlando, I had a friend who was running for state representative for the first time. And he was complaining about how hard it was to raise money as a new candidate. Once you're already elected, once you're the incumbent, the lobbyists find you. They are so happy to be your friend. But when you are new and unproven, it's a tough road to climb. And again, what we're talking about, people that don't already have, inherent family wealth have a little bit more of an uphill path. So me being the person that I am, I started Googling the Florida statutes and looking things up and was like, oh, I can start my own PAC. Okay. And I mean, it wasn't like any of these super PACs that you see on TV spending millions of dollars, but Florida law has a pretty simple structure to set up a PAC that you can support multiple candidates, and you can even coordinate with the campaigns and communicate with them directly. So I set one up. I got some young Republican friends. We supported a couple different candidates that first time. Some of them are still in elected office, but we went for people that were running for the first time or their first reelection in Orange or Seminole County, which is Central Florida. And we had a couple fundraisers for them. We put out little information about them. We also try to amplify our impact by having an event and then inviting the people that attended to also give directly to the candidates. So overall, we didn't, again, it wasn't a multi-million-dollar big PAC or anything, but we got a nice write-up in the Orlando Sentinel. We, raised, I think, $20,000. We helped the candidates raise more. We raised their profile. We got them connected with young Republicans that could be volunteers for them. So it was all pretty positive. And then somebody was asking me to help do that for a county candidate in the next election cycle. And one thing just started leading to another. And I liked that work a lot. And I liked campaigns, and I'd always liked politics. So I scared the heck out of my parents and, hey, that law firm job that has insurance and 401k and an expense account, and I have a secretary in an office. Yeah, I'm going to quit.
The best career decision you ever made, if I say so myself.
Well, I mean, there's pluses and minuses. Like there's no decision that's perfectly bad or perfectly good most of the time. It's definitely, I love when people like accuse me of being a sellout for some reason or another. And I'm like, oh, honey, like if I sold out, I'm doing it wrong. This is, going off on your own with your phone and your laptop to go run campaigns and blog for a living is not usually the most lucrative path. But, I did have a couple campaigns I worked on. And then at some point I just got frustrated because, this isn't true for everywhere, but the Orlando Sentinel was especially bad at it, where their political people would write about things that they didn't even go to, or they'd write about things where one of their people walked in for 5 minutes and walked out. And so, and again, like, I was like, oh, I can do this. So I Googled, how do you make a blog? And if you're really digging around on the internet, you can still find it. It was on Blogspot. It was called Sunshine State Sarah. I apologize in advance for the degraded image links and the amateur writing, but I just started writing, and I just kept at it. And the thing about writing is the more you write, the better you get. And you start looking at how other people are doing it. You start looking at how other people are structuring their sentences and their headlines, how other people are phrasing things. And you just get a little better at it. And I started breaking a couple stories here and there, things that were getting linked by real papers, the Miami Herald and Politico and National Review were linking to me. And you start getting where other people will let you cross post or contribute to their site. And then all of a sudden you're able to get paid a little bit. The path—
Arc Digital does that as well.
Yeah, Arc Digital's great. I've done a couple pieces for them. Bernie's wonderful. So hey, anybody listening out there, you should read them and contribute if you can. Like, we need more independent journalism like that. It's not the easiest thing to make a full-time living on this. I'm very lucky where I am right now. Mediaite's a really good environment, but it's been an adventure. I mean, I'm lucky that I can say I stand by what's under my byline, because my byline's on some websites where I can't stand by an awful lot of stuff that's also on the site. I have not made a secret of my disdain for Steve Bannon and what he turned my friend Andrew's website into. I've stayed out of writing about Red State directly, but they've written a couple things that I thought have just been abhorrent. They wrote something attacking some of my other fellow colleagues who'd left the site, and then that article was taken down, but it was up for hours. They wrote something recently that the Capitol riot wasn't really a riot, it wasn't really a violent insurrection, and the officers weren't really hurt for any illegal— I don't remember how they phrase it. I just remember just like about going cross-eyed reading it. And then they take it down and say they regret its publication. And, everybody's human, everybody's biased. That's, you're a journalist, you're human. You have feelings and emotions and opinions, and, you can't get the facts 100% right 100% of the time, and everyone's going to make mistakes. But there's just too many sites out there on the right and the left that are more dedicated to an ideology and screaming at how evil the other side is than actually getting the story straight. And that's unfortunate.
Well, let's talk more about your time at Red State, because I actually remember back in 2018, I believe it was, when Kimberly Ross and Andrea Caruso, I think, made it very visibly said that they were quitting the blog because of what it had become. And I believe that Sarah Quinlan also wrote for the blog, and I think she quit at a certain point. I actually talked about this with her when I met her at a Principal's First convention in New York City back in 2019. But I mean, what was that like for, not just for you, but for the colleagues that you work with who had to make that decision to say, Red State doesn't stand for what I believe, and I can't write for them anymore? What was that like?
Well, I mean, for me, like the day everybody got fired, which was a bit before everybody those three quit, I'd had a bit of a headache that day. And the good thing about freelancing, you may not be a millionaire, but if you have a headache, you can take a nap and then go back to work later. And so that's what I was actually doing that day. I had put an ice pack on my head and swallowed some ibuprofen and put my head on my pillow and turned the lights off. And a little bit later, my phone started blowing up, and a bunch of concerned friends, hey, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? And I'm like, why wouldn't I be? And I start seeing the text messages and I start seeing the emails, and it was just a flood of emails from my fellow Red Staters and Caleb Howe, who I work with now at Mediaite. and I love working with him. Like he's just, I mean, he was a top-notch editor at Red State. He's great to work with now. Saying that he'd been fired and a bunch of us were fired, and then trying to figure out what was going on, whether I still had a job or not. It was not very clear. And the email that management sent out was phrased in such an awkward way. And by that point, you know, when you're stressed out, you can like feel your heart in your ears, like you're, you know, and I'm like trying to read this email, and it's not entirely clear from like the first paragraph or so whether I still have a job or not. And then I'm like, I think I still have a job. And then, you know, I was like, I read it a couple times, like, okay, so I am still employed, but, you know, most of the people that they cut were on the anti-Trump side. I was reassured repeatedly by Jonathan Garthwaite at Town Hall that my job was safe and it was fine to have an anti-Trump opinion. I don't feel like that was the reality. I was directly criticized a lot by Strife and some of the others. He made it very clear that he thought that Red State should be helping the Republican Party, helping the Republican members of Congress. He was very nasty and negative. And, you know, that Daily Beast piece that came out that before Lachlan Markay went to Axios, the fact that he was working for Dr. Fauci's agency, like, just disgusts me. I mean, those kind of jobs they're hard to get, they pay well, they have good benefits and security, and he threw all that away so that he could be nasty on the internet. And it just seems very deceitful. I knew his first name was Bill, and I knew he worked for some federal agency, but I didn't know which one, and it never occurred to me to go digging into it. So, you know, the whole thing shocked the heck out of me, but it was one of those things that was like shocking, but not surprising. Like, well, of course. Okay. So, you know, I feel like my last bit of time there that my pieces weren't promoted as well, and they didn't get the social media sharing that they had before. I mean, things that should have then read me to a Red State audience. You know, like the Chick-fil-A flare-ups and everything, like just we're going nowhere. And, you know, when you're paid per click and your stuff isn't getting traffic, even when, like, you know, I knew I couldn't, you know, really let my full anti-Trump flag fly there because it just wasn't welcome. I'd get nasty, ugly comments and obscenities in the comment section. But it's just, you know, I left. I ended up leaving. And you know, timing wise, it was sort of amusing because it happened to be the same day that Katie Hill article came out. So, and I've said this before, there was an interview that I did shortly afterward. I did not know that was happening. Strife had kicked me out of the editorial Slack chat a while before. Had I known that article was coming out, I would have protested. I would have objected. I don't think that that's right to publish that kind of thing. I don't think that Red State should be a site that's publishing nude pictures of anybody, period.
Wow. I remember the whole Katie Hill thing. That was, well,
especially since, let's be honest, if you have nude pictures of someone else, chances are they didn't want them out.
It's revenge porn, pure and simple.
It's revenge porn. And, you know, I've heard she's suing them. Good luck, Katie. You know, I just found it really indefensible. And people were like, oh, is this why you're leaving? And then I'm like, and again, like I'm always the one trying to figure out like what's going on. Like, what is this? And like, no, that's not why I left, but woo, I'm glad I'm not a part of that. I'm glad I'm not having to, you know, and now I'm not being attacked for that because I know what, no.
It's weird because I'm old enough to remember that when Red State was virulently anti-Trump, I think this is when Eric Erickson was involved with the blog, and they were very critical of Trump. I think they even said at one point when Trump was going to be the nominee, yeah, maybe Republicans should confirm Merrick Garland because this guy's probably going to lose.
Yeah, well, and you know, keep in mind in 2015. Eric uninvited Donald Trump to the Red State gathering because he said those nasty comments about Megyn Kelly. And there was a huge, huge uproar over that. And then now it got to where somebody who is Trump critical is not really welcome there at all. They've, you know, a couple of them have, you know, taken to sniping at me on Twitter and, you know, whatever, have at it, guys. Most of them are writing stuff that isn't true and it's crap, but it's just really childish and silly. You know, Trump lost, and the Democrats control the House, and the Democrats control the Senate. And I'm not some lone crazy person who decided to be a socialist or leftist or whatever other insult they want to throw at me in the comment section. I know a lot of people. There are a lot of people, especially college educated women, who consider ourselves conservative, but are just horrified by what the Republican Party's become. I mean, this goes back to the Access Hollywood tapes. And what I think a lot of Republican men are forgetting is that there are an awful lot of women who have been victims of sexual assault or sexual harassment, or have friends who have. And that Access Hollywood thing wasn't just print, it was a video.
I genuinely thought that Trump's campaign was over right there and then.
It should have been, and if the Republican Party had any principles, it would have been. They condoned a sexual predator, they endorsed a sexual predator, they elected a sexual predator, period. That's, I mean, there's a concept in the law that if something's hearsay, like if it's said outside the courtroom and not under oath, that it's not admissible, but there's exceptions. And one of the exceptions is a statement against interest. When somebody is just casually admitting something that is a bad deed, you give that more weight and more truth, because why would anybody ever say that if it weren't true? Why would Donald Trump say all those things, that he just grabs women and that he was creeping on this married woman and everything else, if that weren't true? It's either, and it speaks to character one way or the other. It either speaks to character because it is true and he is actually a predator, or it speaks to character that he thinks that's something good to brag about. Either way, he's not a good person, just from that one incident alone. And every woman heard that tape and heard his tone of voice and remembered hearing that from somebody else. Oh, come on, baby, just one more drink. Come on, just chill out. It's fun. We're just having fun. Don't be a prude. Don't be so stuck up. Everybody's heard that voice. I mean, unless you've like lived your whole life in your basement and have never gone out, like anybody who's been to a bar ever, anybody who went to college, anybody who's been out in the world, most workplaces, I mean, the reason that Me Too thing caught on wasn't because it was a liberal scam. It was because most women can say Me Too to varying degrees. You know, fortunately, there's, you know, it's not like everybody's been raped, thank God, but almost everyone has some sort of story where they were uncomfortable at some point. And the Republican Party has been completely fine condoning that under Trump. You look at, what was that guy, Rob Porter, the staffer, that there was pretty credible evidence that he beat one of his wives and one of his girlfriends, and I think there were photographs, and they tried their best to keep him on staff. What was his job? It wasn't like he was curing cancer or some sort of nuclear physicist or the only guy in the world that can operate the computer. I mean, and they were trying to defend him and keep him on the payroll. Come on. You can't say, the Republican Party, I spent my whole life from the time I was in high school and college, young Republicans, college Republicans, all of that. Oh no, I'm not racist. Republicans aren't racist. That's not what it's about. It's not sexist. It's not hateful. And then they go and they elect this guy that's a cartoon character of all the things that the liberals said the Republicans were. And
Donald Trump is basically a Democratic caricature of a Republican.
Yeah. And you know, the thing that's been hard for me is I haven't just written about this stuff. I've traveled around, I've gone to the presidential debates, I've worked on campaigns. I know a lot of these people. I've met them, I've spent hours with them, I've interviewed them, I've gotten to know them, I've met their families. And so when they were all, you know, looking so upset about how Trump was terrible and you know, inciting violence and such a bad thing and going to destroy the Republican Party and such a dangerous thing for America, and then now they defend him.
I guess this ties into my next question about, you know, what's going to happen to the Republican Party, because I have to admit that at the beginning of about a year ago, I was fully convinced that, you know, I was going to make sure that that Trump would lose, and that, you know, Biden was going to be the next president, make sure that happened. And then once that happened, I would return to the fold, within the Republican fold. And I can tell you, for me, what exactly dissuaded me from ultimately doing that. it was in August when Republicans in Georgia nominated Marjorie Taylor Greene as their nominee for a House seat. Despite the fact we knew everything about her then, we like all the stuff that's been saying now. Not
surprise. It's just more details of the same crappy song. She has been singing this for years. She's
exactly
an racist lunatic.
Exactly, but is she the future of the GOP, or can we salvage it?
Look how much effort they put to defend her, and look how much effort they put to defend Liz Cheney.
You have a point.
Liz Cheney did not go on any rant, did not spread any lies. Donald Trump's the worst. I hate him. I hope his family all burns in hell. No, she just said that she objected to his conduct regarding January 6th, and she was voting to impeach. If you look at her actual statements, they were very reserved, very held back, very simple, and very sticking much to the facts and not emotion. And she is being excoriated. She was threatened with losing her leadership position. Her state party has censured her. Matt Gaetz traveled up to Wyoming to campaign against her, even though she's not, the election's not for 2 more years. I mean,
exactly.
This is insane. And then Kevin McCarthy, oh, I'm going to give a talking to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she's just as insane, and she's still posting all this stuff, and that's what they're spending. You look at where they're spending their energy. Where are they spending their energy? What are they fighting for? They're fighting for Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump, and they're not fighting for, people like Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney and Ben Sasse.
It's worth noting that after Marjorie Taylor Greene was disparaging Liz Cheney did not respond in kind. I believe she was a no vote on stripping her of her committee assignments.
Yeah, because she looked at the larger picture and didn't like the political implications of one party moving to do it. Now, what should have happened is Kevin McCarthy should have sat her down and either said, one more strike and you're out, you need to sit down and shut up and behave, or he should have just stripped her of the committee assignments. If he had done either of those things, said, we're going to publicly censure you and you keep your assignment, but you got to behave, or I'm taking it from you now. If they'd done either one of those things and done it publicly, the Democrats wouldn't have had to act. But
exactly. I'd say strip her of her committee assignments, censure vote, and subject her to an expulsion vote. Like that probably won't pass, but subject her to it.
Yeah. And, thinking of Marjorie Taylor Greene, it all ties into Trump because, as many people have said, this is not my unique thought here. Donald Trump is not the ultimate illness. He's the symptom of this ongoing illness that we have in our politics and on the conservative side. If you look at what happened with Marjorie Taylor Greene after she got kicked off her committees, she has a press conference the next day, and every reporter in the DC press corps is there covering it. And look, Mediaite wrote it up too. We're just as guilty as the rest of them, but we have had discussions internally that when is she a story? Everything she tweets should not be a screaming headline. We should not, be doing like that. But if you look at why Donald Trump got elected in the first place, and early in the primary, now he's famous. He is famous even before he ran for president. And they've done studies when they poll people and say, okay, in a generic congressional ballot, would you rather vote for? And they'll give like a generic name, or they'll give the name of the actual congressperson who is in that district. And then they'll put names in like Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, like names that you should not want to vote for. But because they're notorious, because they're famous, people will vote for them. I mean, Kanye West didn't have a platform other than, hi, I'm Kanye West. And he got votes. Donald Trump got into the primary, and because he was such a spectacle, Jeff Zucker admits that he was great for ratings. He immediately got all of the oxygen in the room. It's not even close. He got like the studies, depending on like the different day and network, between like 95 and 99% of the cable airtime and the network airtime. And it was similar for radio and newspaper. and there was no room for anybody else. I came into the 2016 primary with this nerdy anticipation, like, oh, we're going to get this great big philosophical conservative debate, and Marco Rubio's optimism and Rand Paul's libertarianism and Bobby Jindal's school reforms, and, I was so excited about all these ideas being discussed. And what we got was the Donald Trump show, the Donald Trump show. I mean, they would air his rallies live even before he got on stage. They'd be showing an empty podium with all the people with the red hats behind him before he even got up there, talking a little bit. They'd air the whole thing, and then they wouldn't really add any comment or criticism or fact checking. It was only until like pretty late in the game that CNN started giving a couple shots of espresso to Daniel Dale to send him out there and be like, okay, well, here's the 17 things he got wrong in the last 5 minutes.
And just so you know, if they just didn't play his rallies, let's say they just played the transcript, someone reading the transcript from end to end, Trump would not have had the rise that he did.
No. And like, I would talk to people I knew who were like, well, he's the only one talking about XYZ. And I'm like, no, Jeb Bush has a plan on that. Like, Jeb Bush successfully dealt with that issue as governor of Florida. Marco Rubio has a plan on that exact issue in detail on his website. I've interviewed, such and such candidate about this. I can send you the link. I know that Rick Perry has an idea about this stuff because I have interviewed him about it, and I saw the statutes that they enacted and that he signed into law in Texas. It is not true. They're not talking about this. Donald Trump's just getting all the press. And here's what could have happened. And this is like, let me be very clear, put the little disclaimer. I am not plotting to murder anyone. But if I were making a Arya Stark style political hit list, again, not an actual hit list, not going to hurt anybody, Reince Priebus would be very high on my list. Because when he was in charge of the RNC and this primary was getting kicked off, his solution was that idiotic loyalty oath that didn't do anything. What he could have done and what he should have done is gone to every single one of the television networks and said, I'm not going to tell you what to say. I'm not going to tell you how to cover our candidates. I'm not going to tell you who to cover or how much to cover. However, you cannot cover one candidate who just became a Republican a minute and a half ago, 95% of the time. Again, not telling you what to do or how to do it, but if you don't divide it up more equitably, if you don't start interviewing the other candidates and airing their events and having some news about them, you cannot host a debate. You cannot interview our candidates. We will cut you out. He had that power. They would have gone along with it. The rest of them would have been fine with it. Donald Trump would have screamed and cried. And let's be honest, we know, I do not believe that he would have ever been able to make good on his threat to run as an independent candidate.
And if in the first debate, when Brett Baer asked, raise your hand if you can't pledge to support the Republican, and Trump was the only candidate to raise his hand, Reince Priebus should have just banned him from running for the party right there and then.
I mean, that would have likely created a very crazy protest, awful reaction, but he could have demanded, Reince Priebus could have demanded more of a distribution of the television airtime. I believe very strongly that was a large part of the problem, because he got in and then he was getting all the attention. And so people, and look, celebrities are fun. Celebrities are exciting. Even if you don't agree with Donald Trump, you can see the spectacle of those rallies and the noise and hyperactivity of it and see why people enjoyed it. Objectively, you can see why people thought it was fun.
Yeah. What's your time frame like? Should we move to the lightning round or what?
Yeah, let's if we can wrap this up by 4.
Sure. Okay. So it's 3:38 now. We'll definitely be sure to get you out of here by 4. Okay.
Great.
But I definitely just want to say, like you mentioned Jeb Bush, and I think that there was rightly concern about the idea of dynastic politics, but let's talk about Donald Trump Jr., because he very much looks like he is positioning himself to run in 2024. And I just personally feel like if he ends up being the nominee, Republicans who talk about the opposition to dynastic politics can take that talk and put it where the sun don't shine.
Well, look, I mean, Donald Trump is a fraud. This whole I built this empire. No. His daddy didn't just give him money. His daddy gave him existing real estate investments, political connections, and a behind-the-scenes network that was thugging anybody that got in their way. Donald Trump Jr. is even worse. He did not build the brand. He did not build the name. He did not build anything. So it's like all of the bad parts about Donald Trump, but with, you know, less work involved.
Right, but I would argue that in some ways he's more frightening than Trump in the sense that Trump was a bumbling idiot. Junior might actually be skilled.
He seems to have a little bit more ability to focus. You know, he seems a little over caffeinated, I'll just say. I don't want him ever having elected office anywhere. I wouldn't want him on the city council. I wouldn't want him as president. I thought it was, you know, I don't want him getting elected office anywhere. And honestly, the part of the reason that I feel so detached from the Republican Party right now, like if you think that Ivanka and Donald Jr. are the future of the party, then
or Lara Trump, who might run in North Carolina.
No, I mean, you know, after being called a rhino for so many years, I literally am a rhino now. I am still registered Republican, so I can vote against the worst ones in the primary. Florida has a closed primary system and you have to be registered to vote in it. But I don't support them. I haven't given a penny of money. I haven't volunteered a minute of my time. I haven't done anything, you know, since Trump came down that escalator and won the nomination. I'm not an active Republican. I don't feel a part of it. I'm totally comfortable being politically homeless.
Are there solutions, you know, to the situation that we're seeing? Like, for example, one thing I've been thinking about is not adopting Florida's system of closed primaries, maybe opening up primaries like to independents, say, not necessarily to registered Democrats, but say to independents. And because there's a sense I think some have that the reason why people like Marjorie Taylor Greene are able to win is because they're competing. Their only real competition is in a primary where only the most committed and quite frankly, you know, insane voters are the ones who actually show up, and the fact that the general public doesn't show up for these particular elections.
I mean, I've thought about this back and forth, and there's good and bad to switching it both ways. Florida makes you register and pick a party several months beforehand. That may be too restrictive, but I do like the idea of having to pick something. In Texas, you don't register by party, but when you go in on primary day, you say whether you want a Democrat or Republican ballot. You pick one. And I think that kind of gets, you know, kind of gets the best of both worlds there, where you're still having people affiliate, but you're giving them a lot of freedom to do that and freedom to change. You know, I will say one of the things that I would encourage people to do is look up what Justin Amash has talked about with Congress and the committee structure and leadership. It's not just the primary system that has everything messed up. We have a system where the vast majority of bills are just coming from leadership, rolling through the committees, and then being brought out to the floor. And the vast majority of members are not getting a part of affecting them, amending them, debating them, anything. I mean, we roll our eyes at these 10,000 page bills, but that's happening over and over and over. And it's not just a Democrat or Republican problem. There was you know, and I've heard Amash say this before, both Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi have had no amendments from the floor, no amendments on bills that weren't brought up, that weren't already pre-approved by leadership. And if you think about what that does to concentrating power, it's beyond a Democrat or Republican problem. You end up with the power being concentrated in the hands of the top party leadership, their staff, and the well-connected lobbyists. So that's the problem.
And it leaves like congressmen like with Matt Gaetz, like or say anyone else who's a backbencher, the only real thing that they can do is you know, go on the floor, give a crazy speech, and then have it go viral, and then send out an email for fundraising.
Yeah. I mean, and that, like, Amash has said openly that the reason that he retired from Congress is he likes being a legislator and he couldn't legislate.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about Florida politics? I always like having my guests talk about politics. So I guess how has Governor DeSantis been as a governor? Because, and just, correct me if I'm misstating anything, but I think I do remember you saying, you were open to voting for a Democrat in that election, but when that Democrat was Andrew Gillum, you ultimately went with DeSantis over him.
Yeah, I mean, look, Ron DeSantis ran an idiotic campaign that was basically like, Trump likes me, please vote for me.
Right.
I mean, there were a couple more words in it, but that was pretty much it. But Andrew Gillum was an incompetent hack. Even besides all the messy, personal stuff that's come out, the number of investigations swirling around that guy about financial improprieties and trading, political favors. And look, I lived in Tallahassee for a bit with him as mayor when I first moved here. He wasn't competent. I don't believe he was competent. And when somebody is not competent at a lower level job, you don't promote them. So, I saw the way he dealt with press criticism. I saw the way he dealt with, hurricane problems. And I just didn't have a lot of faith in him to be running the whole state. If Gwen Graham had gotten the Democratic nomination, I think she might be governor right now. She would have been a lot more palatable to independents, moderates, and Republicans who weren't sure about a Trumpy candidate. And to DeSantis's credit, he's done a lot of good things. When he first got in, he did a lot of house cleaning. He took some corrupt people out of office. He fired some people from some boards. And look, my own personal opinion, even if I support a candidate and I love them and I campaign for them and I really want them to win, I want them to win by like 2 or 3%. Just enough to avoid like the recount litigation and all that mess. But an elected official should never be cozy. They should never be comfortable in office. They should always feel like they have to fight to maintain the support of their constituents, that they still need to listen to the people who voted for them. So, the idea that he was going through, that DeSantis went through, and a lot of these people, lost their jobs. Cool, great. That's good. It's good for bureaucrats to be nervous. I feel like he's gotten unfair criticism in some of this COVID stuff. The statistics that are coming out now that Florida's been doing better than California in a lot of ways, and our rules have been a lot less draconian. But at the same time, I feel like he could have communicated it better. The job is 2 things. It's doing it and communicating it. And I feel like a lot of times he's kind of had the attitude, well, they hate me, so I'm not even going to try. They hate me and they're not listening, so I'm not going to tell them. And that's not what I want from an elected official. I would like him to be more forthright. That whole stupid, silly nonsense about the lady that was running the COVID database and got fired. She's a mess. She's had some crazy theories, and she still tweets out stuff that's wildly inaccurate. And the press propped her up and gave her all kinds of credibility that she hadn't earned. But what they should have done is publicly, very visibly replaced her with somebody else and been more transparent about the reporting. There's ways to handle this that could have been done better. He's been unfairly criticized, and he hasn't been as forthcoming as he should have been. So, I think that's a very fair assessment.
Okay, and I will say there's at least one person who might watch this who was going to send me a very angry PM, but I would have done the same thing in 2018. I would, in terms of open to a Democrat, but when that Democrat was Andrew Gillum, going with DeSantis. And I was going to say that I think I supported Adam Putnam in the Republican primary, not in the sense of donating, but in the sense of rooting for him.
Yeah, I mean, I knew Adam because he was a fellow UF grad, Go Gators, and I've known him for a long time. I've met him a lot, and I just was more familiar with him. I've met DeSantis too. I mean, in person, they're both nice people, so there's that.
But I guess why does it that the Florida Democratic Party seems to perpetually lose the state by anywhere from 1 to 3 points? Because they haven't won a Senate or presidential contest there since 2012. I think they last won the governor's mansion in '94. And I believe that a few months ago, there was a story where the state Republican Party had 8.3 million in the bank. The state Dems had 127K. So why are they perpetually bad at their jobs?
The Florida Democrats often make the same mistake that the national Democrats do. And that is mistaking the Twitter echo chamber for the voter base. Right. When you run somebody like Andrew Gillum, who wasn't just an incompetent mayor, but was a lot more radical in his positions, you have trouble getting crossover votes. There's a lot of people that might be registered one way or the other, but don't really vote that way. You know, there's a lot of people who are still registered Democrat in Florida. It's not so much now, but I mean, until about the last decade, there was an awful lot of Democrats that were conservatives that just hadn't changed their registration. I mean, I ran a campaign for a guy who was a military veteran, state attorney, as conservative as could get. And he was on the ballot as a Democrat because his daddy was a Democrat and his daddy was still alive and he was not going to not be a Democrat. Right. His daddy was still alive. And you look at who they're putting forward, look at where they've had successes, though. When they've had successes, they've put forward some smart congressional candidates. They've put forward some energetic state reps. Ana Eskamani and Carlos Smith are both way more liberal than I am on pretty much every issue, but they're very outgoing and very friendly and very nice, positive people, and they do a lot of constituent outreach. They're very liked by their voters. You look at Alex Sink, who was the CFO before, one of the last statewide elected Democrats. She was viewed as more moderate. She came across as a very adult, prudent, responsible person. She was not advocating extremely liberal ideas. She was definitely a Democrat. She was not a Republican by any means, but she didn't scare the Republicans. Same thing with Gwen Graham. When she ran, you know, if they'd been able to knock Andrew Gillum out of the primary, I believe she'd be governor right now. And the one statewide elected Democrat we have, Nikki Fried, who's actually a friend of mine from UF, we were in school together at the same time. She again ran as intelligent and having ideas for the policies, and she's definitely a Democrat. Nobody would mistake her for a Republican. She supported Joe Biden. She endorsed him in the presidential race this year, or last year rather. But she did not come across as scary to the Republicans. And the Republican candidate chose a strategic path that sounded more Trumpy, sounded more angry, sounded more sharply far right. And, you know, Nikki won. So right. The Democrats win. Basically, the Democrats win with smart women, it seems. So they need to gather up their smart women and get them in a room and put them in charge. Like if the Florida Democrats are smart, they'll sit down with Gwen Graham and Alex Sink and Nikki Fried and say, okay.
Or Stephanie Murphy.
Yeah. Stephanie Murphy has had a pretty strong, has a pretty strong record. And again, you probably don't hear much of her in the news because she's not a crazy person screaming about things.
The best politicians are the people you've never heard of.
Yeah, the people that are actually reading the bills and doing the work and getting and trying to get good policies passed. I don't believe that either party has a monopoly on good or bad ideas. But the Democrats need to listen to their smart ladies is what they need to do.
Of course. I think Republicans also need to do that too. I do want to ask, I guess, one more question and then we'll make sure that you get out of here on time. There's a place on Twitter called Election Twitter, and one of the things that's been a big topic of conversation since the election on Election Twitter was the 22-point surge to the right in Miami-Dade County. That arguably cost Joe Biden Florida. And I'm just curious, is that likely to happen again? I figure it's going to happen with Marco Rubio because he has a strong base of support there, but is that what we're looking at, is a single-digit margin for Democrats going forward in Miami? Because if that's the case, I don't think Democrats can win Florida again.
Well, that's why you don't see they'll make a lot of noise, but they don't really have anybody running against Marco because he does start with that strong base in Miami, in South Florida. Now, I will say, again, this is where the Biden-Harris campaign made a massive strategic error and where the Democratic Party nationally made a massive strategic error. when you first are arriving on the political scene, if people don't know you, you're wet concrete. So your job as a campaign is to scratch into that concrete as deeply and as repeatedly as you can what you want your brand to be. And if you don't do it, your opponent will. The Democrats let Trump and the GOP brand them as socialists. They were not, they all criticized when violence broke out from some of the protests over last summer, but they weren't fast enough at it and they weren't unequivocal enough with it. They were, you know, when you've got Democratic members of Congress saying things like, well, of course they're unhappy. We need a little unrest to shake up the system. Ha ha. You know, I forget the exact quote, but, you know, we've all seen those clips, and the Trump defense team played it at the trial.
Maxine Waters, yeah.
People, and again, you talk about a picture says 1,000 words and a video says 1,000,000. When you can see a city that you've been to before in a riot, in flames, it affects you. You can't get that out of your head. I mean, when you see police and protesters physically brawling and reporters getting arrested and people spray painting buildings and lighting cop cars on fire, this is all a very visceral, emotional, overwhelming thing to see for months at a time. And the Democrats let the Republicans brand them with it. Well, the Democrats are fine with Antifa. The Democrats are fine with violence. They're going to burn down your cities, and they're socialists, and they're going to do all this. And they let the Republicans write in their concrete. And the closer we got to the election, that concrete started hardening. Joe Biden, you know, would say, "Oh, I'm not a socialist. I beat the socialist candidates." But the Trump and the Republicans have been screaming socialism all year. So as you talk about undecided voters, that's wet concrete settling. The closer we got to election day, that concrete was settling, and socialism had been scratched into the Democrats' part of the sidewalk. And you look at all the places where people were maybe a little uncomfortable with Trump, but they voted Republican for Congress and Senate because they're scared of that socialism word. And look, everybody down in South Florida, if it's not their parents, it's their next door neighbor. Someone knows somebody that came from a communist dictatorship. Right. Everyone down there knows people. Everyone down there has heard stories. And, you know, they don't want to see that happen again. And I understand that. I don't think that Trump is the answer, but I understand, you know, and the way that the media covered it, oh, well, there's misleading ads being run on Latin radio in Miami. You know, the Cubans in Miami aren't stupid.
Right.
You know, they're not any more prone to conspiracy theory than, you know, a white person in Wichita, Kansas, or a Japanese American person in, you know, San Francisco. You know, this idea like, oh, they all got fooled or everything. No, I mean, people have very real reasons to be concerned about socialism, concerned about radically liberal policies, and Trump and the Republicans effectively messaged to that. And if the Democrats let them keep doing that, they will never win Florida again.
But does Biden, I guess my follow-up to that would be, does Biden now have a full term to prove that messaging was wrong and define himself as not socialist?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now, you know, if he goes and enacts a bunch of like pushing for these minimum wage laws and, you know, some of the other stuff and some of the educational reforms, they'll get people all up in a riot.
Although Florida did just vote to increase the minimum wage. Yeah.
They did, and it's going to be phased in. It's pretty slow. I think it takes 5 years to get to $15. Mm-hmm. I personally have some pretty mixed feelings about that. I know that the way that these places work, they're not, somebody like me is always going to be fine, but for the high school kid or the person trying to rebuild their life, you just made it harder for an employer to want to take a risk on somebody.
Yeah, so, sorry if I cut you off there. I know that we were out of time, so I just wanted to make sure that we could get that in. Where can people follow you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter. My last name is Rumpf, and so there was this rap song that came out in the 90s by a special little group called Rex and Effects that became an instant nickname. So that's my Twitter handle, Rumpf Shaker. It's RUMPF SHAKER. You can also find my work at Mediaite. mediaite.com.
Sarah, really great to have you. I definitely think, if we should definitely continue this conversation sometime.
Okay, great. That was fun.
Okay.